So my talk is called Incorporating Midwifery Perspectives into Obstetric Research on Substance Use in Pregnancy. I thought it was kind of funny in the program it says midwifery perspective, and I was going to message Yael and say that there was a typo, and then after yesterday's discussion of having different perspectives and everything, I kind of went, yeah, it really is only one perspective, it's mine, so maybe it was a Freudian slip. So yeah, I've been working with the Ontario Birth Study this summer. It's a database. First, actually, while I'm talking about my research, I would like you to think about that question: what does it mean to bring midwifery perspectives to research, especially in obstetrics, especially given that midwives are diverse and have diverse clients. Something else I've been thinking about a lot, sorry, trying to find the spot here, is whether it's even possible to incorporate diverse people's experiences and perspectives into quantitative research when really I'm going off numbers and data and not actually interacting with people. So I would love to know what you have to think about that. The Ontario Birth Study is an observational database of lifestyle and diet questionnaires, clinical data, and biological specimens from 1,500 pregnant women receiving prenatal care at Mount Sinai Hospital and also St. Mike's. I work on the clinical data entry, that's my job, but then I also asked if I could do a research project on the data. My research is looking at the prevalence and socio-demographic correlates of substance use in pregnancy, so I'm looking at alcohol, tobacco, and illicit substances. Should I be moving one way or the other to make this better? No? Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay. And the source data for my study is just the lifestyle questionnaire. So what I'm going to be talking about is purely self-reported prevalence. We're not testing anybody's urine. We're not doing any other sort of ways of finding out who's doing what. We're trusting what they have to say, and they're written questionnaires. Oh no. What's that? I'm so sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So before I get into my research, I'm just very quickly going to touch on the harms associated with substance use in pregnancy. This is not the domain of my study because I'm just looking at the lifestyle questionnaires. But with alcohol use in pregnancy, we're all aware of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, which include a range of birth defects, including physical malformations as well as learning disabilities. There's also an increased risk of small for gestational age and preterm birth at higher sort of frequencies of alcohol consumption in pregnancy. At moderate doses, some research actually finds decreased risk, which I think is hypothesized to be because of that alcohol is actually acting as a proxy for socioeconomic status in those cases. In terms of tobacco, cigarette smoking is considered to be the most important preventable risk factor for adverse pregnancy outcomes. So it is unquestionably associated with small for gestational age, preterm birth, stillbirth, neonatal mortality, and cleft palate. In terms of illicit substances, it's hard to even know what to call them. Do we say street drugs, recreational drugs? Obviously, they're all very different in their mechanisms, and so the harms are also varied, and they're not well established. So to even determine the harms of an illegal drug in pregnancy, we have to rely on observational studies where there are tons of confounders with socioeconomic status, and it's very difficult to parse out what's actually going on. So the previous opinion and sort of the media representations of illegal drug use in pregnancy would have us think that there's all kinds of horrible physical malformations that can happen, and the research is kind of coming out and saying that's not actually what's happening. We're seeing more sort of neurodevelopmental outcomes, and it actually may be the case that many of these problems are more attributable to the child's home environment with a substance-using mother or with the socioeconomic issues that come with substance use than actually the prenatal exposure itself. So that said, why do we actually care about prevalence? Why do we care about how many people are using these various substances in pregnancy? Well, one reason is to assess how well our efforts at sort of harm reduction are working, all of these public health campaigns and all the work we do in clinical practice. And the other reason is to fill the gaps in what is known right now. So even if you see more recent estimates, the data, actually the most recent data on alcohol, tobacco, and illicit substance use in Canada is from 2005 to 2008. So we're going off 10 years ago. A lot has happened in 10 years, and especially with respect to marijuana and legalization. So there are many limitations to my study. As I mentioned, it's self-reported data, which is sort of has been shown to people self-report drug use at a much lower rate than they're actually doing it compared to what we can find with biological testing. And that's because of stigma. That's also because they don't necessarily remember, especially if you're asking certain questions about sort of frequency. How many glasses of red wine did you drink 2 months ago at the start of your pregnancy per week? You know, people don't always remember or estimate averages accurately. As we'll see, the question wording makes a big difference in how people self-report, and this is also relevant to US clinicians. The way you ask the question will change how people answer about what they're doing. Our enrollment criteria with OBS is a significant limitation because there are a number of criteria that actually sort of carry protective factors against substance use in pregnancy. So you must be 18 years of age or older to enroll in the study. You must have a viable fetus and no known major congenital abnormalities at the time of enrollment. You must be less than 17 weeks gestation at the time of enrollment. And OBS recruits out of Mount Sinai and St. Mike's hospitals in downtown Toronto. So let's add that you must be receiving prenatal care at a tertiary academic hospital by 17 weeks gestation. Well, guess what? Substance use in pregnancy is negatively correlated with early prenatal care. People who are using substances in pregnancy, this is awful. Okay, that's okay. People using substances in pregnancy don't typically, or it's sort of negatively associated with early access to prenatal care, and that's partly because they don't want people to know, and partly because of the socioeconomic factors.
That one if you want, and I'm going to fix this one. Sorry.
Thanks. How about this? Okay. So, more on limitations. The demographics of people who actually enroll in OBS and actually end up filling out all their lifestyle questionnaires looks very different from the typical profile of someone who's using especially illicit substances in pregnancy. As you can see, the age is a little bit on the higher side for pregnant women in Canada. Marital status is primarily married, 87%, with another 10% living with their partner, so it's a very partnered cohort. Education, most of our participants are highly educated, only 3% don't have any post-secondary education, and 86% of the pregnancies are wanted. We can imagine what effect that has on people's behaviors in pregnancy, and other estimates find sort of wanted pregnancy to be about around 50%, so that's a big difference. So now I'm going to talk about my findings. A little disclaimer, especially for the webinar, these are findings in progress, and they also don't belong to me, they're unpublished, so please do not cite or disseminate them in any way. So in terms of alcohol consumption, it's the most common recreational drug, if we can consider it that, used in pregnancy in Canada. It has very different risk factors or sort of demographic correlates from the other two categories of substances I'm going to be talking about. So prior to pregnancy, 87% of the sample was using alcohol, or drinking alcohol, but 88% of people who did drink alcohol in the 12 months before pregnancy reported stopping drinking prior to or when they found out they were pregnant. When asked how many drinks they had consumed in the last few weeks or last few months of pregnancy, 8% and 4% respectively reported drinking anything at 12 to 16 and 14 to 32 weeks. However, in the second lifestyle questionnaire, when they were asked, have you consumed any alcohol in your pregnancy, 21% said yes. So it's very different from 8% and 4%. And we can start thinking about how we ask people questions and how that changes what they answer. In terms of binge drinking, which is associated more with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, before pregnancy, 52% of pre-pregnancy drinkers reported any binge drinking, which is defined as 4 or more drinks in the same sitting. Not by me, but sort of in the literature. And then in pregnancy, this was less than 1%, only 2, I think, out of 1,200 reported that. Postpartum, 70% of respondents reported drinking, and 6% of respondents reported binge drinking. I thought this was kind of interesting. So actually by type of alcohol, people's drinking patterns really changed. Before pregnancy, there were some sort of equal amounts of liquor and other drinks to beer and red wine, white wine. But as pregnancy progressed, people were reporting fewer and fewer liquor and other drinks to the point of no liquor and other drinks in 14 to 32 weeks of pregnancy. I think this kind of falls into this thing that you hear like, oh, you can just have one glass of red wine, but in the literature there's actually no sort of difference in what type of alcohol you're drinking based on like what side effects happen. For cigarette smoking, while 32% of the sample reported consistently smoking at some point in their lifetime, only 9% smoked in the 3 months before pregnancy, and this is down to 1% at each time point in pregnancy and postpartum. I thought it was interesting as well that the actual amount of cigarettes smoked per day in those who did continue smoking didn't really go down at all, except a little dip in the third trimester. And this difference, or this sort of phenomenon that we're seeing with both alcohol and tobacco, that people are reducing the most in the third trimester, is not actually in line with what we know, which is that organogenesis is happening in the first trimester, and sort of the most important time not to be doing these substances. But of course, many people don't know they're pregnant. Quitting is very difficult. So that might be sort of an area of future research, is how do we line those things up. It's also interesting to see that people are quitting smoking with a wider sort of window around pregnancy than people are stopping drinking. So that may play into sort of, might be the socio-demographic issues. It might also just be how effective our public health campaigns are. In terms of illicit drug use, 9% of respondents reported illicit drug use in the 3 months before pregnancy, and this is primarily marijuana, reported by 7% of the sample. 3% of the sample recorded illicit drug use other than marijuana. During pregnancy, 1% of respondents recorded illicit drug use, and this was almost exclusively marijuana. The only drugs reported other than marijuana were prescription analgesics and tranquilizers being taken without a prescription. So whether we even consider that recreational or illicit drug use is sort of questionable. There was a considerable loss to follow-up in that people who reported drug use prior to pregnancy often, or at a higher rate than those who did not fill out the second questionnaire, and vice versa. So people were filling out the second questionnaire but not the first one, which can really distort how our data actually looks. So the next steps for me are to look at the demographic and psychosocial correlates of substance use in pregnancy. I'm going to rely a lot on past research of what has actually been identified, so looking at age, income, education, marital status, wanted pregnancy, and that kind of thing. I'm kind of grappling with whether to include ethnicity. Other studies have found correlations, and there's a lot of the ethical issues around that. I really wanted to look at breastfeeding and co-sleeping and whether that affected postpartum substance use, but my investigators did not like that idea, so I won't be doing that. And in the future, I think it'll be really interesting, since I'm talking about prevalence, to follow what are the patterns of pregnancy use of marijuana in the context of legalization. So back to my question, what does it mean to bring a midwifery perspective to research? As I said, I'm looking at data, I'm working with numbers every day, and I find it hard to bring back in sort of the midwifery concepts that we talk about a lot, so I really hope that in the question period I can hear your opinions on that. All the while being mindful of our connections with obstetrics and not trying to keep midwifery and obstetrics as diametrically opposed. But I do find that in the research context, I do have very different sort of ways of approaching these issues sometimes than my obstetrics colleagues. And I also want you to think about what is the purpose of prevalence research on substance use. Why do we actually want to know these numbers and these percents that are sometimes kind of made up? And how does this information translate into clinical practice? And a final note that OBS is taking volunteers, so if you have a day a week and you live in Toronto and you want to help out, get in touch with me later. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions? Or
Does anyone have any opinion